Hello everyone, King of the Reviews here, and today we'll be talking about the silent warrior himself, Nagashima Keigo. Keigo is one of the most important characters in Out, and his storyline is an easy favorite among the fandom. Keigo has been through a lot in the series so far, and his recent backstory in Volume 21 was a great way to cohesively connect everything we knew about him. In this video, I'll be going through the many things Keigo has been through up until volume 21, and then I'll break down how the backstory during his fight with Furin took his character into new heights. The backstory as a whole deserves its own video, so I will not break down the entire backstory in this video, but instead I'll focus solely on the parts that dealt with Keigo's character. If you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Also, support me on Patreon for early access to videos like this one. The link is in the description down below. So who exactly is Nagashima Keigo and what makes him so great? Let's talk about it. Everybody get your fucking hands up. In the story of Out, Keigo first shows up in chapter 10. Just like most of his future scenes, he doesn't engage in conversation and just stays as a mysterious figure in the background who occasionally folds paper cranes. At the time, we know nothing about Keigo except that he's pretty close to Kaname and Tanzawa, and that he seemed incredibly interested when he heard Kaname lost a fight. This interest seemed to come from the feeling of wanting to fight whoever beat Kaname, which can translate his character to one that either loves fighting or one that wants to protect his friends, or maybe both. Next time we see Keigo was when Tatsuya was invited by Kaname to a gathering and was about to start a fight with Tanzawa. Keigo stepped in the way to protect Tanzawa, and we learn through Kaname that he's in the Special Forces. Not only do we learn that he's in the Special Forces, but the next scene we see Keigo in, it tells us he's the captain of the Special Forces. We also heard from the Shimohara brothers that Keigo fought 8 people with just a wooden sword and won. At this point of the story, we learn that Keigo isn't some random mysterious bodyguard that is near Tanzawa all the time, but he has the prestigious title of Special Forces Captain as well. And according to the Shimohara brothers, he has strong accomplishments like beating 8 people at once with a wooden sword, which was so unbelievable that everyone doubted its authenticity. This helps emphasize the strength of Keigo as a fighter and helps validate his position as a Special Forces captain. The next scene we saw with Keigo, he was holding a weapon while many of his enemies lay knocked out on the floor. He presumably whooped all of them, and it was easy to tell he was strong. But while he was distracted, we see one of the enemies grab a knife and goes to stab his back. This all leads up to the first major milestone of Keigo's character, his battle with Shimohara Kuji. Kirihito set up a fight against Fakurakan that consisted of 3 1v1s. It was supposed to be Kaname, Keigo, and Tanzawa, but Iguchi had to take Kaname's spot. However, this gives some insight into Keigo's important position in the game, since out of everyone in Kirihito, he was chosen as one of the 3 people, along with the head of the gang and the vice head of the gang, who would defend the gang when its existence is on the line. This doesn't necessarily translate that those are the 3 strongest characters in the game, but it definitely speaks on their importance and what they symbolize to this team. As mentioned earlier, Keigo is the captain of the Special Forces, but what exactly are the Special Forces? The Special Forces is a role where they specialize completely in offense. The strength of the Special Forces alone is a good measure of the team's overall strength. Special Forces do many things from blocking roads to breaking through police checkpoints. They'll also be the ones fighting on the front lines in the war. The position comes with its risk though. They run a high chance of getting injured or arrested, so you need more than just physical strength to handle this kind of responsibility. And out of everyone in Kirihito, Keigo was the man chosen to be the captain of the Special Forces and carried all its burdens. As the captain, he's basically their star player and incredibly revered throughout the team. As Keigo fights Kuji, we learn that he really did get stabbed in the fight earlier and is currently injured. However, he still wants to fight to keep the morale of the team high. As he fights Kuji, We learn that Keigo is not only just talented with his weapon, but he's also really good at close quarter combat as well. We learned that Keigo's dad made him do Kendo for a huge portion of his life, and he ended up one of the highest ranked fighters in the country. He didn't care too much for the way of the sword though, so he quit, and only limited his sword use to when he's fighting large groups of people. As he's fighting, the crowd starts to cheer for Keigo. Tanzawa says he's just as popular as Kaname since Keigo has helped every single person in the gang at least once during a fight, even the boss himself. He comes running in to help when anyone in the gang is fighting, which makes it look like he does it purely because he cares deeply about his friends. But that isn't the full story. Keigo is a guy that absolutely loves to fight, so you always find him in the middle of the action. He's referred to as Kirihito's own Fado Junkie. Keigo ends up putting Kuji on the floor by smashing his knees as a counter, and it seems like he pretty much won the fight. Tanzawa starts to go into a brief history about Keigo. He mentioned that Keigo has always been a menace and said he even picked a huge fight with the fifth head of Kirihito, Josuke. But after he joined Kirihito, he couldn't just start random fights anymore, so he satisfied his fighting urges by making those paper cranes we see all the time. This fact, despite being very little, really emphasizes Keigo's title as a Fado Junkie, since every time we saw him making a paper crane, it is supposed to symbolize him holding back his strong urges to start a fight. The battle of Kuji continues when Kuji gets up with a knife and prepares to attack Keigo again. Tanzawa steps in and stops the fight because Keigo is bleeding way too much from his earlier wound. Keigo looks very disappointed but heads to the hospital to get his wound treated. We learned that he got into that gang fight earlier and ended up stabbed because he defied Tanzawa's orders of laying low. Kaname getting hurt by Bakurakan made Keigo furious enough to ignore Tanzawa's orders, which he never does, and went to go get revenge immediately. We learn a lot about Keigo during his fierce battle with Kirihito and Bakurakan. We learn about his Kendo history, his scuffle with Josuke, his use of paper cranes, his position in the gang and role in the gang as well, as his love for fighting and his love for his friends. Keigo doesn't really talk, but words are not needed to have such a powerful presence in the story like Keigo does. The next time we see Keigo, he confronts Kenzo, who was about to fight Tanzawa. We always see Keigo trying to protect Tanzawa from hostility, which shows he's one of the most reliable people Tanzawa has around him. The next scene of Keigo was a small one where Kirihito was having a celebration with their win against Bakurakan. Keigo left his chopsticks to go aside, and we see his vice captain lick them due to a weird obsession with him. It was a small moment, but definitely hinted towards how their character dynamic will continue to develop as the story goes on. The next scene of Keigo was a Kirihito higher up meeting. Kaname was talking about the recent events, and we learned that Keigo stepped in and settled things between another gang named SID and a high school student they know called Takahashi. Because of Keigo's assistance, Takahashi and his family will give the gang a free car and a special discount for their used car business. We see just how important Keigo is at keeping Kirihito on the top. By himself, he was the mediator between another huge gang and a victim of a local school, and because of his actions, Kirihito now has extra business and perks. This shows that Keigo isn't just the Special Forces captain for show, since he puts in the work behind the scenes to back up such a prestigious title. The scene ends up with Tanzawa announcing that Fiorin from the 6th generation is back, and the whole higher management of Kirihito, including Keigo, were sweating in fear at the idea of Fiorin's return. Keigo is not a man of many words, but seeing his fear of Fiorin shows that the 6th generation are definitely some scary opponents. The next scene shows Keigo dropping off Tanzawa with his motorcycle. He lingers for a while before leaving, which shows the huge concern he has for Tanzawa's safety, especially since the 6th generation is out of juvie now. As Keigo leaves, Tanzawa gets surrounded by Fiorin and his group. Just as Keigo feared, Tanzawa is about to be jumped by almost 30 people out of revenge for what he did to the 6th generation. Tanzawa holds out for a while, but before things get too bad, Keigo shows up again to protect him. To reach Tanzawa though, Keigo will have to go through about 27 enemies just by himself. Luckily for Keigo, he has been in these situations many times before since he's an experienced captain of the Special Forces. Armed with just a wooden sword, Keigo gets to work on his enemies. This scene was used to highlight Keigo's abilities and range as a fighter. We saw him fight 1v1 battles back in the war with Bakurakan, but as the captain of the special forces, he would need to be able to handle himself in non 1v1 scenarios. Keigo's battle starts with him choosing to fight on the sidewalk instead of the main road. Keigo is experienced enough to understand that the road will easily let him get surrounded on all sides, but on the sidewalk, he only has to worry about his front and his back. Furin points out that Keigo has gotten a lot stronger within 1 year, and Tanzawa says they have been training in preparation for the sixth generation's return. Furin gives Keigo a time limit of 2 minutes to reach him and Tanzawa, or else Tanzawa will be captured. Going through about 27 people in 2 minutes is a very difficult task, but if someone can do it, it will definitely be Keigo. Keigo starts off his group fight using strong, quick attacks that can disarm and take out opponents in one hit. He also makes sure he never stops moving, so it will be very difficult for his opponents to surround him and take him down. Despite how well he can fight, 27 people are still far too many, and some of them end up tackling him, but Keigo makes sure not to fall on the floor. Since once you're on the floor while being surrounded with that many opponents, it would be a horrible scenario you can hardly escape from. Keigo's doing his best while fighting all these guys, and is even taking many hits along the way, but he never loses his fighting spirit and continues to deliver blow after blow to his enemies until he finally reaches Furin with 2 seconds to spare. Keigo wins the little condition Furin set for him, and as Furin was about to leave before the police come, Keigo continues to attack to keep Furin from running away. Keigo starts fighting Furin and starts doing very skilled lunges and feints in order to attack him. Furin, however, was able to predict where Keigo will go because his feints are too good that it became predictable to someone of Furin's caliber. Furin then tells Keigo that his fighting style relies solely on his weapon and that limits his potential. Then Furin pushes Keigo away with his weapon, pretends to attack with it, but instead he finishes off Keigo with a powerful strike from his arm to the neck of Keigo. Keigo was stuck catching his breath and couldn't see that attack coming. The scene ends with Furin finally escaping and Tanzawa helping Keigo get back to his feet. From this battle, we learn just how talented and powerful Keigo is as a fighter. Fighting that many people at once is incredibly difficult, and he handled it skillfully. Despite how amazing Keigo did, his fight with Furin introduced some potential weaknesses in Keigo's fighting style. This is the first time we see Keigo get outclassed in the fight, which makes this scene very important for his character moving forward. Going through a heavy loss like this can break many strong people, so how Keigo bounces back from this loss will reveal his true nature as a fighter. After his fight with Furin, we don't see Keigo for a long time. In chapter 92, Saramura claims that Keigo has gone missing and no one is sure what he's up to. In chapter 100, we see Keigo carrying a huge bag on his back, which is most likely a new weapon. It was also noted that his eyes looked very dangerous. We get more information on Keigo's situation from Toshi. He said Keigo has been missing for a month and hasn't shown up at home or at work. While Toshi was talking to Iguchi, a bunch of Kyoranki guys pull up and we also see Keigo with them wearing one of their shirts. Everyone is confused on why Keigo switched sides since he was practically Tenzawa's best bodyguard. The leader of the group that attacked Iguchi is called Kakizaki, and we get some information on Keigo's and Toshi's relationship with him. Kakizaki used to run the school they were at, and he constantly bullied Keigo, who stood out as the lone wolf in the school. Kakizaki said Keigo went to the door 3 days ago, and Kakizaki asked if Keigo wanted to join, which Keigo nods yes to. Keigo also has a humongous wooden weapon that looks very dangerous and hard to handle. He takes it out and gets ready to attack Iguchi and Toshi, but instead he turns around and smashes Kakizaki on the face. Keigo handles the rest of the Kyoranki gang with ease until they're all wiped out. Toshi tries to spark a conversation and gets attacked by Keigo as well, as if he was also an enemy. Iguchi tries to stop Keigo and notices his eyes look dangerously scary. Iguchi realizes that Keigo won't listen to words and decides that a fight with him is inevitable. Keigo swings at Iguchi and misses, then Iguchi closes the distance and disarms him. Toshi tries to stop the fight before someone gets hurt, but then Kakizaki wakes up and tries to talk to Keigo. Keigo picks his sword up and knocks out Kakizaki one last time. Before passing out, Kakizaki is telling Keigo he doesn't know where the location is, presumably about their hideout. Keigo then walks away while Toshi explains that when Keigo has that look in his eye, no one can control him. Toshi then says again that he even fought the legendary Josuke while being in that same mental state. This scene is interesting because it started off with Keigo looking like he betrayed Kirihito, but he then plays the double agent and takes out their opponents himself. Based on what Kakizaki said at the end, Keigo seemed like he wanted to get the location of the hideout, which is very important for Kirihito to know to do well in the war. Keigo appears to still be looking out for the interests of Kirihito, and there is evident importance given to his mental state when he has that look in his eye. He was even trying to harm Toshi, a close friend, and had rumors of him doing extremely dangerous things like fighting Josuke while in that mental state. This scene was important overall because we got more insight on Keigo's mental state when he has that crazy look in his eye, and we also see that Keigo still has Kirihito's best interest in mind, even while not being in the right headspace. The next time we see Keigo in action is when he goes against Furin, but before then we get various comments about his character throughout the chapters. Keigo gets mentioned by Toshi at Kirihito's barbecue. Toshi's still looking for Keigo because he's worried, and while they were talking about Meguro, they use Keigo to hype him up by saying even Keigo minds his behavior around Meguro. Later in the series, Kenshin from the Special Forces was fighting Furin, and we hear that Kenshin was actually in a good position to be captain of the Special Forces, but Keigo had more charisma and took the position. Kenshin eventually gets overpowered and he's about to lose, then Keigo comes in and saves the day. As Keigo returns to the battlefield, he remembers a quote that tells him a way to massively boost himself. The quote says, Keigo, the human body doesn't suddenly become strong overnight, and you can't just suddenly improve your physical abilities either. But there is one thing you can do to give yourself a massive boost, and that's. But the quote ends on a cliffhanger. The Special Forces team is getting overwhelmed since there are just way too many opponents for them to deal with. However, Toshi announces that Keigo has returned and they all get powered up again. Furin tells Keigo that Nikaku died, which makes Keigo twitch a little bit. Kenshin is then seen chatting with Toshi about the situation. Kenshin, who seemed to dislike Keigo, seemed to be secretly happy that Keigo returned. Toshi then explains how he had to chase Keigo all around the Kanto region and that he told Keigo about Nikaku's death the night before. Keigo gets ready to fight Furin again, this time with a much larger weapon than his usual wooden sword. He lunges at Furin, which Furin blocks with his teddy bear weapon, but it turns out that Keigo's swing was actually too sharp and the teddy bear ended up sliced up. We see Keigo again, and this time he has a long sword, with the same crazy look in his eyes as when he fought the fifth head Josuke. The quote from earlier that was left on a cliffhanger ends by saying, Keigo, the human body doesn't suddenly become strong overnight, and you can't suddenly improve your physical abilities either. But there is one thing you can do to give yourself a sudden massive boost, and that's your state of mind, spirit, will, feelings. Feelings of intense rage and bloodlust. We then see the scene end with Keigo stabbing Josuke. The scene is important because it shows a side of Keigo we have never seen before, while still maintaining his charisma and position as the captain of the Special Forces. We learn that the Special Forces love Keigo so much, and his presence alone gives them power. We also got new mysteries surrounding the history behind Keigo's eyes, his history with Furin and Ikaku, as well as symbolism behind the quote we heard earlier. The backstory answers all these questions and puts a tight knot on the many aspects that makes Keigo a great character. Before we get into the backstory, here is everything we know about Keigo so far. Keigo is a strong fighter who doesn't talk and has the title of the captain of the Special Forces of Kirihito. He seems to be Tanzawa's main bodyguard and has always helped out almost everybody in the game, which made him just as popular as Kaname. He's a battle junkie that loves to fight and uses paper cranes to hold back his urges. He was one of the national elites at Kendo and was rumored to have beaten 8 people with just a wooden sword. He has fought Josuke while having crazy eyes, and when he's in that state, he can't be controlled. Despite the things we know about Keigo, there's still things we don't know, and it keeps him a very mysterious character. Again, for the backstory portion of the video, I will only focus specifically on the Keigo scenes, since the entire backstory will be done in another video. The backstory does a great job in explaining the context behind the events surrounding Keigo, as well as emphasizing the many qualities that make him such a compelling character. Keigo's backstory takes place 2 years ago when they were in middle school. Keigo walks in and they start talking about the rumors surrounding him. They say that he had a case that recently got dismissed because he attacked half a dozen guys from the Kendo club with just a wooden sword, which all started because he caused some commotion right before nationals and then dropped out the club. This scene validates the rumors that the Shimohara brothers from Bakuraken said, where they mentioned Keigo being known for taking out a bunch of people with just a wooden sword. Knowing that this rumor is actually true and is something that started when he was in middle school really helps emphasize the legacy of Keigo and the dangerous offensive ability he has. The backstory continues with Toshi's friends recommending that he should recruit Keigo since they have trouble keeping up with Kirihito's insurance payments. But Toshi says that they don't need a defect like Keigo. After negotiations went bad with Kirihito, Toshi realized that he needs as much help as he can get and goes to talk with Keigo. Toshi explains to Keigo the history behind Kirihito and their school and asks Keigo for help to obtain the money they need. Toshi mentions that they will extort, steal, or mug people if it means that they can obtain the money. Keigo shakes his head when Toshi asks if he would help, and then Toshi attacked him, but Keigo beat him quite easily. Keigo then left some valuables for Toshi to have to help him with the payment, and then he just leaves the scene. This scene is interesting because the Toshi we know now is a huge fan of Keigo, but we see him refusing to even associate with Keigo because he sees him as a defect. He ends up being forced to associate with him anyway because he needs help with the Kirihito insurance payments, but despite Toshi being very rude and attacking him, Keigo still decides to help Toshi with the payment, even though he still refused to help Toshi actually gather it. This can be interpreted that Keigo understands the situation and wanted to help, but he just didn't agree with the methods Toshi was considering, which was extorting and stealing the money. Keigo doesn't mind giving away his prized possessions like his wallet and jewelry for their goal, but it seems he does not want to help extort or steal from different people to get the job done. This shows a new side to Keigo's character where we see him refuse to participate in activities like stealing and robbing. Even throughout the story, we never saw him trying to extort or steal money from other people. Keigo is still a violent person who is hard to get a grasp on mentally, but we now know that even he has his own principles he refuses to break for other people. The backstory continues with Toshi, who still couldn't get enough money to fulfill the new quota for the Kirihito insurance payment, and apologized and begged his crew to help him. His crew, while walking home, suggested ditching Toshi since it was his fault in the first place, and Keigo was hearing the entire conversation while sitting on the bench. Keigo is not the only person outside of Toshi's gang that knows Toshi's having trouble with Kirihito. Toshi then prepares to meet with the Kirihito higher-ups to explain why he couldn't get the full payment, and no one in his gang showed up. He was left all alone to handle everything, and after coming in terms with their betrayal, he moves forward to the meeting. Before he gets too far, Keigo shows up to assist him. Toshi is confused about why Keigo is here, but Keigo expresses that he brought weapons and wants to help fight Kirihito for Toshi. At this point of the backstory, Keigo is the only person that was there for Toshi who was abandoned even by his closest friends. Toshi was not even being nice to Keigo since he tried to attack him, tried to force him to help extort people, and then didn't even say thank you when Tejo gave him money. However, this didn't stop Keigo from deciding to help Toshi when Toshi needed it. This side of Keigo helps emphasize the charisma he has as a person, since he has every right to leave Toshi, but still came to assist him, and having someone like that in your circle will make anyone feel safe and protected. In the next scene, we learn that some of Toshi's gang actually went ahead to try and negotiate, but things were turning sour quickly. Before it gets any worse, Keigo threw money to distract the Kirihito members and Toshi started attacking them. Keigo joins in and they start taking out many opponents. Toshi says that he has never felt so safe fighting with someone before Keigo. Arashi pretended to give up and then captured Toshi. He asked Keigo to drop his weapons since if he attacks, he'll hit Toshi too, but Keigo still ends up swinging at Arashi, which takes him by surprise. Keigo tries to follow up on Arashi, but gets blood splatter on his eyes, which obstructs his vision, and then gets tased and attacked by a metal weapon. Arashi attacks Toshi again and is about to take out his eye, but Keigo wakes up. Arashi tries to use Toshi as a shield, but Toshi prepares himself to get hit by Keigo, so he can use the recoil to actually hit Arashi. After Arashi gets hit, he falls towards a wall, then Keigo follows up with a heavy knee strike. Arashi passes out, and eventually Keigo passes out too. Toshi again emphasizes that he feels no fear around Keigo, which speaks to his insane charisma. This scene is important because we see just how reliable Keigo is as a fighter. He was a middle school student that took out the captain of the flying column, Arashi. This would be similar to current day Taguchi losing to a middle schooler. It is certainly an amazing feat and pushes Keigo to a higher level. This scene also helps give insight into why the special forces feel so inspired around Keigo, since Toshi said on two different occasions that he feels so safe and fearless when he's fighting with Keigo. Toshi was going against the same dude that put insane amounts of fear into him and even almost took out his eye. But Keigo's presence was able to negate all of that and even make Toshi stand strong against Arashi. We also saw the destructive nature of Keigo's fighting style. Instead of giving up due to the hostage, Keigo instead is willing to hurt the hostage to get the job done. This is a different side of Keigo that we don't usually see, but it emphasizes his fighting junkie title since he clearly approaches many situations in very unconventional ways and still wins. This fight was a major milestone in Keigo's delinquent career and marks the beginning of the Keigo we know today. The backstory continues with Toshi talking to the people that deserted him. He forgives them, however, and they comment that he and Keigo make a good team. But punching Toshi just to hurt Arashi is very weird and kinda crazy to them. Toshi explains that Keigo did that punch out of kindness, since he could have hit Toshi with the knee kick and took both him and Arashi out, but instead he went with the punch that would still keep Toshi conscious, but still set up Arashi for the next attack. We then learn that Keigo's in the hospital for at least a week, and his mom says she has to do continuous police and hospital visits because of Keigo. She gets frustrated and says Keigo shouldn't even wake up. We learn that Keigo isn't even her real son, and his dad dumped him on her and left. Toshi then plans to throw Keigo a party after he gets out, and his gang agrees. We learn a lot about Keigo from this little scene. Toshi now became someone who was a huge fan of his, and we can see the start of his obsession with Keigo. We also learn that Keigo is not on good terms with his stepmother, who actually wished for his death. His father is also out of the picture, and his stepmother is unsure where he even is. We got more mysteries to find out about Keigo, but overall, based on how Toshi's gang was talking about Keigo, we realized just how much charisma he has since they were willing to throw a party for him and speak such high praises for him despite disliking him in the beginning. In the next scene, Keigo receives the text from Toshi about the party and smiles while seeing the picture as he gets ready to go to it. When Keigo arrives, the party was already raided, and one of the hurt guys from Toshi's gang tells him that Furin has kidnapped Toshi. The hurt guys from Toshi's gang apologize for betraying Keigo, and they tell him where he can find Toshi and follow him to go fight Kirihito. Keigo seems very frustrated by the events based on the looks of his face. While the guys from Toshi's gangs are preparing to fight Kirihito, they are noticeably very scared and frightened. Keigo remembers his father's words, which was the same quote we saw earlier before the backstory began. Keigo, the human body doesn't suddenly become strong overnight, and you can't just suddenly improve your physical abilities either, but there is one thing you can do to give you a sudden massive boost, and that's your state of mind, spirit, will, feelings of intense rage, and bloodlust. Harnessing the message of the quote, Keigo remembers what they did to Toshi, and his eyes sharpen as he channels his rage. Keigo, not being scared and practicing his swings, helped raise morale of the guys that followed him. This scene was important because it shows the growing relationship between Keigo and Toshi. Their relationship reached a point where Keigo is willing to fearlessly charge into a dangerous gang just to save him. We also have confirmation that the quote from earlier came from his father, and it's easy to understand why he holds his words close to his heart. This scene also emphasized that part of Keigo where he's able to calm and inspire those around him. We hear from Toshi that Keigo makes him feel safe, but the other members of Toshi's gang also say that having Keigo near them gets them pumped up and calms them down. The next scene shows Keigo entering the building, and Kaname and Tanzawa comment that he looks like trouble. Keigo stares at Josuke, remembers what happened to Toshi, then unsheathes his knife in preparation for an attack. Josuke announces his win to everyone in the building, and then gets stabbed in the back by Keigo. Tanzawa kicks Keigo to the floor, and then Team Keigo and Kirihito start to fight each other. Keigo's swings are tearing off the skin, as he looks very dangerous. Arashi comes in and says he'll handle everything before it escalates too far. Arashi explains that they should actually keep Keigo around, and it was mostly his fault for causing this. He says Keigo, from how he attacked Josuke while surrounded in enemy territory, is someone who is certifiably insane and can look death in the eye and charge ahead. He wants Keigo to join Kirihito where he can use this talent of his properly. Arashi finally convinces Josuke, then he and Keigo make eye contact before Arashi walks away. Tanzawa then talks to Keigo and says he's impressed with him, but then warns him that he won't hold back next time Keigo attacks Josuke. This scene is another huge milestone in Keigo's delinquent career and gives us context behind what exactly happened to cause him to stab Josuke. Keigo just wanted to get his friend back from Kirihito, and we also learn that the rage in his eyes is his way of becoming stronger quickly, even though he becomes far more violent and uncontrollable. This scene also establishes Keigo as an official Kirihito member, and his actions made him well respected by all who witnessed it simply by how insane it was. This scene was also the first step in blossoming his relationship with Arashi, who ends up becoming somewhat of his big brother figure. In the next scene, we see Keigo training with Nikaku. Nikaku beats on him while they comment that Keigo having that crazy look in his eye means that there's no telling what he can do or what he is capable of. Toshi talks to Arashi about their future, and they mention that Keigo needs a place like Kirihito, as well as someone like Toshi by his side. Arashi asks about Keigo to Nikaku, and Nikaku says he's heads and shoulders above the rest of his year, but there are not many people in Kirihito that can take him on one-on-one. Nikaku says getting beat up every day should put a fear in normal people, but Keigo is being driven by emotion stronger than fear, and it causes him to act the way he does when he's backed into a corner. He predicts that Keigo will get himself killed one day by diving headfirst into a situation he should have avoided in the first place. This scene is important because it reveals the main mentality issues Keigo had during his early years in Kirihito. Nikaku and Arashi agree that Keigo is on a path to self-destruction, and he needs to change before it gets too late. Arashi wants Kirihito and support groups like Toshi to be able to contain Keigo and keep him heading towards a safer path. We also get validation from Nikaku, who said Keigo is stronger than most the people, and not just in his year, but in Kirihito in general. Nikaku is someone who is currently regarded as one of the strongest characters in the series, so hearing him say that about Keigo really highlights his potential and his strength as a fighter. The next scene shows Keigo walking while injured, and he remembers his father's words telling him to live an honest life and focus on his swordsmanship. He grits his teeth and spits out blood, possibly signaling that he doesn't completely agree with what his father wants. Keigo then gets attacked by Furin. Furin ties Keigo up and tries to bury him. Furin breaks Keigo's phone and wants to burn his wallet so that there will be no traces, and says he doesn't hate Keigo and actually respects him based on what he has done so far to Josuke and Arashi. He says that Arashi likes bringing misfits home like they're an abandoned puppy, and Keigo fits that description. This explains why Arashi has been paying so much attention to Keigo. Furin says he can't be family with Keigo and wants to kill him since he can't bear Keigo interacting with Arashi and he can't forgive him either. Arashi comes in and says he had a GPS tracker in Keigo's wallet. Furin kicks Keigo into a ditch which knocks him out, and Arashi asks Furin to let him go. As Arashi is talking with Furin, he mentions that he thought Furin had poison and needed Arashi in her life, but after needing Keigo, he got reminded what true ingrained poison is like. He says the poison Keigo has is stronger than Keigo himself, and Keigo needs someone to counteract that poison or he will succumb to it and lose control. After some scuffles, Arashi finally gets Furin to leave Keigo alone and accept it. This scene is important because we get more context behind the relationship between Arashi and Keigo. Furin explained that Arashi likes taking people with problems who need help and providing proper aid to them to counteract their problem. Keigo has a few mental issues and is on a path of self-destruction, and we know that Arashi sensed that and wants to help Keigo walk down a better path. Keigo's father also mentioned him wanting the same thing for Keigo, but it seems Keigo still has his own qualms about going down a different path. However, these actions from Arashi gives a good insight into why the relationship turned out to have much mutual respect, because Arashi seemed to genuinely care for Keigo and wants to support him. Backstory continues with a scene where we have Toshi, Keigo, and Arashi out by the sea. Keigo looks at Arashi and recalls the events leading up to this point. He woke up at an underground hospital looking confused, and Arashi tells him he can trust the underground doctor since he won't snitch to anybody. Arashi tells Keigo to forgive Furin for him, no matter how hard it is, and says he will make it worth his while by giving him information regarding his father. He tells Keigo he can decide what to do about Furin after that. Some Yakuza comes in and their presence is intimidating to Keigo and Toshi. The main Yakuza is named Ogata, and he said that Keigo's dad called Keigo a bona fide Kendo prodigy. Ogata then says Keigo's dad died in the same area they're standing on by the sea. Ogata said Keigo's dad was a warrior without a master, had balls of steel, and the hotter the fire, the more eager he would be to jump. The way Ogata described Keigo's father was very similar to how Arashi described Keigo back when Keigo stabbed Josuke. Ogata then said they used to call Keigo's dad a battle junkie, which is what Kirihito ended up calling Keigo as well. Even though Keigo's dad was not an official member of the group, he was a huge reason why Ogata's company could survive so long. Ogata then gives Keigo the sword his father left behind, which is regarded almost like a family heirloom. He then says that his dad wanted Keigo to stick to the straight and narrow path and not end up like him. Before Ogata leaves, he says that the sword wasn't that good, but in Keigo's hands, it looks like he was born to wield it. Keigo sits by the seaside while holding his sword and thinking about the news about his father. Toshi asks how Arashi knew about Keigo's dad and wonders if Keigo's okay. Arashi says Keigo's obviously not okay since he just found out his pops died, but Keigo's still on the path of self-destruction, so he wanted Keigo to confront the worst case scenario and let him understand that he could end up the same way as his father. Arashi says people like Keigo who have feelings that are difficult to understand are tortured by loneliness and need someone to stand by their side in their isolation, someone that understands. Because if left alone, they will lose themselves and self-destruct. Toshi understands that his role is to become that sort of person to Keigo. Keigo remembers his father's words telling him to focus on his swordsmanship and not become like him. Keigo then cries in silence. This scene was important to Keigo's character because it was the first major step in his progression as a character. Keigo learns a lot of things during this scene, and the biggest being his father's death. Keigo is presumed to have a complicated relationship with his father, but seeing how he still shed tears for him and remembers many of his quotes, it was clear that Keigo still liked his dad. Keigo and his father were similar in many ways. As mentioned earlier, Ogata described Keigo's father very similar to how Arashi described Keigo. Both of them seemed to charge right into danger and having little regard for their own safety. This fearlessness is what makes them so powerful, but it comes at the cost of them having a higher chance of losing their life. Keigo's father was also called a battle junkie, just like Keigo is called in Kirihito, which again shows the many similarities they share. Keigo inherits his father's sword as well. Despite not being a very good sword, it is said that it fits him well, just like it did his father. Keigo goes through a lot in this scene, but he gained a solid support group because of Toshi, who after hearing Arashi's speech about the situation, resolved himself to become someone that Keigo can rely on and save him from his loneliness and his self-destructive lifestyle. In the next scene, we have Keigo fighting Nikako again. He is losing as usual, and his eyes go insane as he is about to grab a rock and use it as a weapon to attack Nikako, but Toshi screams out his name, and Keigo regains his composure. Keigo now looks more composed as he readies himself for the next round of fighting with Nikako. Keigo then comes up to Arashi and bows his head, most likely showing his gratitude for what Arashi has done for him so far. Arashi understands and thanks him. Keigo walks away while giving Furin a serious look. This little scene shows the progress that Keigo's character is making after that huge event where he learned about his father's death. Keigo usually can't contain his rage after his beatings from Nikako, but thanks to Toshi he is able to be more composed and looks more firm as a fighter. Toshi became someone that can reel in Keigo when he's going off the deep end, and as stated many times earlier, Keigo definitely needs someone like that in his life to prevent himself from entering super dangerous situations. Keigo is also shown bowing his head to Arashi out of gratitude, which was the first time we have ever seen him do that in the entire series. Arashi became an existence to Keigo that he acknowledges as someone who is there for him and deserves his full respect. Considering how they started off, it was amazing to see them reach this point. The backstory continues with the 6th gen, talking about how they would handle their problem with Arashi, as they mentioned that Keigo is most likely going to be chosen for the selection now that he met Ogata. He also said that Tanzawa was using Keigo to beef up the 7th generation as a valuable new recruit. They also said that Keigo most likely didn't hear anything or know anything about Ahmad since he was tied up and unconscious for most of the conversation. This little scene emphasized how highly Keigo is being regarded in the delinquent order. Tanzawa is using him as one of his trump cards to make the 7th generation have more influence in the game, which not many people are qualified to do. Keigo is also mentioned to join the selection, which is only for well-regarded delinquents that most likely can't fit into normal society. Only the cream of the crop can be selected, and Keigo is already being scouted as a future member. Keigo being tied up also explains why he currently doesn't know anything about the Kyorenki hideout and Ahmad, even though he has been there before. The backstory approaches its end as we see Keigo piggybacking Tanzawa, which shows how close they are already getting. He's talking to Josuke, and he mentions that Keigo is settling in nicely in Kirihito, and that his progress is mostly thanks to Ogata and Tanzawa and Kaname. While talking, Arashi sees Keigo, and Keigo gives him a wide and happy smile before leaving. The backstory continues with the 6th gen pulling up to kill Arashi, and Arashi sends Keigo a text before fighting them. The next time we see Keigo in the backstory, he's looking around for Arashi. It has been 2 years, and he is still looking. Arashi's old girlfriend finally tells him that Arashi loved talking about Keigo and considers him an amazing talent. She says that the last night she saw Arashi, he was fighting an extremely tall man and a gorgeous woman with long hair, which is very obvious to be Ikaku and Furin. These last scenes are impactful because it shows Keigo's character progressing away from the old uncontrollable hothead he was before. We all know that Keigo is currently very close to Tanzawa, despite them having a very standoffish introduction to each other, and this scene shows Keigo piggybacking Tanzawa like they are close friends. Arashi even says Tanzawa and Kaname have been doing a great job of settling Keigo in nicely in Kirihito, which again emphasizes the current close relationship in the story. These scenes also showed how strong of an existence Arashi became to Keigo, since for the first time in the series we see Keigo give a beautiful angelic smile, and it was to Arashi. There is a saying that people who truly care about you will really show it when you're gone, and we see Keigo still searching for Arashi despite it being 2 years. That is a very long time, but Keigo wanted to meet him again so badly that he never gave up despite it being so long. Keigo is also one of the people Arashi decided to text while he was facing death, and his girlfriend mentioned that Arashi loved talking about Keigo. Keigo and Arashi's relationship was very close, and Arashi brought out many sides to Keigo we have never seen before, like the respectful bow and the beautiful smile. Arashi was the one that helped Keigo find a place to belong and continuously saved them from physical threats like Fury, and helped him mentally find closure with his father. This backstory did a phenomenal job of showing the many reasons that made Keigo a fan favorite character. We learned a lot about his talent in Kendo and had validation that he can take on many enemies at once. His fighting ability was also emphasized numerous times by having him take on Kirihito higher-ups like Arashi while still in middle school. We got a lot of context behind the rage in his eyes and learned it's a way for him to get stronger quickly, but because he's like that, he will eventually self-destruct. We also see him getting strong support groups like Toshi and Arashi, who helped him become a more respectable and calmer person. They completely changed his dark fate and showed him he can stay a powerful delinquent while still maintaining a good state of mind. The backstory also provided closure to Keigo's father and showed his evolution to the man he is today. Keigo is also a very charismatic person, and we see numerous times how just fighting alongside him powers up and inspires many people. This is not just a talent he had as the captain of the Special Forces, but something we see hinted at from way back in middle school. We see the blossoming relationship Keigo began to have with Tanzawa and Kaname, and the antagonistic relationship he had with Furin. Despite Nikaku beating on Keigo every day, he was still the old Special Forces captain that helped train and taught Keigo the ropes when it comes to that role. We can assume that Nikaku's death still affected Keigo, which can be seen by the twitch he had when Furin mentioned it during their fight. The backstory ended off by showing that Keigo most likely understood that Furin, Ikaku, and the rest of the 6th generation were the ones responsible for the death of Arashi. Keigo already had beef with Furin because Furin kidnapped Toshi, then kidnapped Keigo, and almost killed Keigo, and then now Furin killed Arashi. Knowing all of this reveals that the meaning behind the current fight between Keigo and Furin is much more powerful and much more emotional than we originally thought. Arashi was a special existence to Keigo, which Furin took away, and now Furin is trying to take out all his current friends in Kirihito as well. The backstory showed that this fight is more than just simple self-defense, and there is a lot of revenge and emotions on the line here for Keigo. Overall, Keigo is easily one of my favorite characters, and for someone who does not talk, I was very surprised he ended up being so charismatic and loved by everyone in and out of the story. He's truly a great representation of actions speaking louder than words. I believe his character only has room to grow, so I'm very excited to see his story continue from here on out. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Also subscribe to my Patreon for early access to videos like this one. The link is in the description down below. Thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.